Welcome to our Living Stones podcast, where we gather to discuss all matters of faith and life as members of God's household. In a world that often leaves us feeling fragmented and disconnected, our hope is that Living Stones will help to further connect us as we pursue the Lord together. I'm your host, Siyoung, and in today's podcast, we'll be discussing the question, how should we view our work as Christians? And here with me today, we have Pastors Paul and Jacob. So thank you guys for joining us in our discussion today.
It's great to be here.
Hello.
Back again, back at it. All right. So I guess just to, kick things off, make this a little interesting, can you guys give like a brief overview of your career from like your first job to now? Just like a brief read of your resume, basically.
Go ahead, PJ.
Let's see. I haven't really worked a lot outside of ministry. I think my first official job, part-time job, was when I was in college. Freshman year, worked at a bookstore called Lifeway, a bookstore owned by the Southern Baptist. Worked there for, I think, about 2 years, and then worked at a tutoring center as an office manager and assistant. Let's see, what else have I done? And then after that, straight into ministry. Worked with Campus Crusade for Christ in the Asian American ministry called EPIC, and pastored part-time. Also worked at International Justice Mission, a non-government organization, and also did some odd jobs here and there for like AT&T, and I did some painting also when I was in college. Yes, so lots of weird experiences, but I guess professionally it was ministry and IT.
Very nice. How about you, Pastor Paul?
Well, I did, I guess early on, after I moved back to the States, my first job was at Wendy's. So I think I worked at Wendy's for 7 months or so on Green Street on the U of I campus. So that was transitional time for me. And then I believe it was more volunteer work, but there's a small church in college that wanted my help, like with their small youth group, and it wasn't like a official internship or anything. Just as a lay leader, they want me to serve, and so that was my first exposure to actual youth ministry. Oh, of course, after college there was Coopers and Lybrand. This is before they merged with Price Waterhouse. I was with them for a year doing some auditing work and tax work, and then went to Westminster, worked at their cafe. I was like the cafe manager.
What?
Got a little bit of discount, I guess. I worked as an RA in the dormitory there, to save some, I guess, save a little money there as well. And then, after that was ministry. Youth ministry mainly early on, and then, EM ministry after, so.
Nice. Wendy's. I didn't know that.
Wendy's. I normally don't. I would say I will say their chili was actually pretty good. I mean, I know I know the ingredients that was used, and I would say pretty legit chili. They just use like a day old meat, like leftover hamburger meat. So I mean, it's good quality stuff for the most part for fast food.
I'm trying to imagine you working in retail, and I have a hard time imagining it for some reason. Did you do cashier?
I was a fob. I was too fobby to be a cashier at the time. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you're in the back more.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes more sense.
Back of the house.
I see. For myself, my first job in high school was working at Blockbuster, and in college I worked at a computing lab at JMU. It was like a work study kind of thing. Also part-timed at Toys R Us seasonally during college as well. And then after college, got various IT positions, and then sort of evolved into cybersecurity, and also worked at church as a part-time intern starting in 2017 until I quit my corporate job in 2023, and then have been working full-time ministry since beginning of 2024. So it's been a little bit over a year in ministry full-time. So I'm the newbie. I'm the newbie compared to these guys who've been working in ministry for such a long time. So with that said, I want to ask this question because I think this will open up kind of like the direction of our discussion today. Why is this topic important? This topic of working and laboring and career, jobs. Why is this important for us to talk about, especially as Christians?
Well, it's a topic that I actually wanted to tackle during this podcast because, well, work is what we mainly do, right, throughout life. But I do believe, and maybe we'll touch upon it more later, but it's the idea of work. I mean, it has sort of evolved throughout the centuries, but I think now we're sort of in a period where work is it's not understood biblically at all, and a lot of people are confused. I think most people, even in our church, they view work as sort of like a necessary evil, right? And you just kind of do it to pay your bills. There's really no appreciation for what work is in light of God's design for it. And so I wanted to explore this topic to hopefully encourage our members, especially to view work in a more redemptive way, and hoping that as they engage in work, that they would do so in a way that honors the Lord. Right? You don't want to have a low view of work where work is just something that you do to make money. I think too many of our members, and not going to name names, but I think that this is the sentiment I have is they're doing bare minimum, right? Especially like because of COVID. COVID has changed the game, like for most people, I would say, and our expectation of like our work week has become so minimal, right? I think I wouldn't be surprised if on average, like people are working like, less than 5 hours a day, okay? Because you work from home, right? And no one's like monitoring you, and no one's keeping you accountable. And, I know people who have worked on the golf course, or worked at a retreat, stuff like that. So this is sort of the current moment we're living in. And I want us to get back to reality. And as things sort of are changing right now with our culture. And so people are asked to go back to the office and put in honest days of work. But this is very disruptive for us, right? It's like we're not used to this. We don't like it. But the reality is this is how probably it should have been, earlier. So I just, I think it'd be worth talking about.
How about you, PJ?
Well, it's something that God had already designed in the beginning of creation. He made Adam, and he was placed in the garden to work the land. And not only so, for the people of God, he already designed a frame of our work life. 6 days you shall work, 7 day will be a solemn rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. And so God has created human beings, not just for the purpose of working, but he created us so that we would work, multiply, have dominion over the created world. And so it's something that we're called to do. So not even considering the number of hours per day, but are we even working appropriate number of days in a week? Because God specifically in his commandment, 6 days you shall work, 7 day will be a solemn day of rest. But I think a lot of people think of you work in order to work hard so you can play harder. And it's just trying to figure out how many days of play you can get and how little work can you do in order to play more. But I think that has led to some problems that we see in our society today, and perhaps even in individual lives and their mentality.
Mm-hmm. How would you guys sort of define the parameter of work? Because I think as it stands, we're sort of talking about sort of the corporate culture, right? But what about those who aren't working in like companies or working in the office?
Well, I mean, I wasn't just thinking about corporate culture.
Yeah.
But I understand why you bring that up. When I first brought this topic up, right? Sorry to call Davina out, but I think she was confused because in her mind, what you guys don't even work in the corporate world, right? Why you went? And so even that I would say is just a sign that perhaps we need to really reorient our thinking, because work is not just corporate work in the secular workplace. It's work encompasses all work, right? You can be a stay-at-home mom, and that is your calling, that is your work, right? And so I think just to go back to having a holistic view of work would be a good corrective to offer. And I was sharing earlier before recording that when I was first introduced to this topic of work, it was taught. It was through books and also through a lecture that I was listening to. That back in the day, when the church was more prominent, right? Like let's say during medieval times, right? There was, I guess, the pendulum swung the other direction, where the work of the clergy was considered much more valuable than any other kind of work. And I think part of the reason why is because to be in that position, you had to be well educated, right? And everyone else was sort of like peasants. They were uneducated, and so their work was viewed more as like a necessary work, but not as valuable. And so that created this sort of sacred versus secular distinction or dichotomy that was very extreme. But then during the Reformation, there was a corrective, right? And so people like Martin Luther and John Calvin, they tried to offer a more balanced view and minimize that sacred secular divide, basically asserting that all work is work given to us by God, essentially, right? And so our callings may be different, but there's no one work that is like far more superior than another. And so just to kind of, I think that's also something that we need to maybe reemphasize during this time, because again, we live in a culture where one kind of, like, especially my wife has felt this many times throughout her calling, like her life, where being a stay-at-home mom was viewed as a waste of time, right? And even the idea of like just homeschooling, that what are you doing? That's not healthy, or that's not real work, sort of thing. So we're constantly battling against these false conceptions of work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those are good points, and this kind of helps me segue into our next question, because I think perhaps understanding how Scripture explains or views work, how God views work, would help to establish some good foundation for us to think about the fact that it's not just a secular corporate work that's considered work, but even staying at home, stay-at-home moms, or homeschooling, or even ministry, right? It's also a vocation in and of itself. So that leads me to ask, what does the Bible have to say about work, labor, jobs? I know PJ kind of mentioned it in the last question. Can you guys sort of explain or expound on what Scripture says about work? how we ought to view it.
Well, one thing I can, I guess, add to what PJ shared was that it was helpful for me early on as a young believer to understand that work was given to Adam before the fall, right? And so that means, right, theologically, and this is a helpful thing for everyone to know, that when anything sort of built into the created design, like created order, right, that means it was meant to be good, right? It's not the result of the fall, but it was meant to be something that we can embrace as good and noble. And so work, you can't, I know it feels like a curse at times, right? Everyone feel like we perceive it as a curse, but because it was given to us before the fall, right? That's not true. It's not a curse. I mean, it was cursed, right? Work was made difficult because of the fall, but see, work is something that was given to us prior to the fall. Therefore, it's meant to be redeemed, right? And it was good. That means also that when we get to heaven, there is going to be some form of work, I believe, that's given to us, right? So we're not going to be living, lazy lives throughout eternity, but we're going to be diligent in work and good work, right? And so I think that's just something helpful to always keep in mind.
Yeah, with that, it does make me wonder. Yeah, it's the thorns and the thistles that come from our work that makes work feel like a curse, and it makes me wonder. As I do think that we're going to be laboring, we're going to be working in God's eternal kingdom. It's going to be a whole new world. The old will be gone, so we don't know exactly what type of work we might do. But even now in our fallen world, there are levels of satisfaction that we experience where we put in the hard work, but we can gladly say, this was worth it. There's something satisfying about what I've been able to do. And that's where I think work will become so enjoyable in God's eternal kingdom, because every work we do will be productive, will be satisfying. So it's exciting even to think about that. I have no idea what I'm going to do, right, in the eternal kingdom. Will I serve as a priest, or a farmer? I don't know, as all things will be made new. But to know that every single thing that is done will be met with a lot of produce, satisfaction, enjoyment, fulfillment. I think that's wonderful to think about.
Yeah, and I would even maybe take one step back and say, when God created everything, right? In a sense, He labored. There was work that He did, and he saw that all that He had made, and he said it was good, right? And so I think there is an expression of God's sort of creativity, diligence, and His sort of vision and beauty baked into His work of creating. And I think us being created in His image, we inherently sort of carry that aspect of God's creativity and His and so in conjunction with what you guys are saying, I think it's sort of in our DNA. And I think Keller argues for this in his book, Every Good Endeavor. It's like baked into our DNA to work, just as our God also worked.
As image bearers. And I'll quote from R.C. Sproul, the late R.C. Sproul. The sanctity of human labor is rooted in the work of God Himself and in His call to us to imitate Him. So as we work, we're imitating God, because He is the ultimate worker.
Yeah, and not to mention, like, Adam and Eve being called to cultivate, the garden, and subduing sort of the creatures and everything. I think that was meant to be an act of worship, ultimately, to the Lord. And so, I think for us as well, our work is not just like Pastor Paul was saying, it's just not some evil that we have to just sort of deal with and get through, but it's meant to be an act of worship unto the Lord, because precisely for the reason we're reflecting the Creator, the ultimate worker in a sense. And so I think if we have that sort of robust understanding of God and the work that He has given to us, and who He has created us to be, I think that will give us some level of, I think, mission and purpose beyond just,
you know.
Oh, definitely, it should. And even hearing that, I'm actually encouraged, right, to work harder myself because, I mean, to know that we have been blessed through the work of God, right? Through Jesus's work, right, on the cross, we've been blessed. We received this incredible blessing, and so that ought to give us this idea of how valuable work can be, right, if it's done well.
Yeah.
And even if you think about just the people that make our lives a blessing, whether it's your barber, right, or do you go to Siyoung instead? Where do you go?
I go to a barber.
Okay. Or we all own homes, right? And so we are looking for people who can help with repairs. I mean, I recently just like last year we had to have someone come to fix our dishwasher. But you're looking for skilled people who are good at their work and who are honest. And I mean, think about how frustrated you are when you hire just a bad contractor, and they just make a mess of your place. It adds that much more grief to your life. But if you encounter a good worker, whatever field it may be, like it's such a blessing, right? You're so happy.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it should really motivate us to view our work in that way as well.
Yeah. Even when we go to restaurants, when like a particular waiter or waitress is so good at what they do, very attentive, and even their demeanor, right, is so positive.
Yeah.
It makes for a great experience. And I think
Yes.
I appreciate that a lot. And, it's just a simple meal, but even in that, I think I'm blessed in some ways. As it's not the greatest job, that pays the most, but even in those little moments, I think it can reflect God in His excellence.
Right. And that's an example of people working hard, not because they're paid particularly well, but they have another reason why they're working so hard and so faithfully, and I wouldn't be surprised if such people, it's because of their faith, right? In either in the Lord or in something like a higher purpose of something, So, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree.
So going back to the question that you proposed of what is work, would it be fair to say that work is something, or we might have to put the adjectival of good work, but it's the result of producing something that is good? Because from what I'm hearing, like that's what I feel like how we might define work to be a good work, in that it produces something that is worthwhile, it produces something that is beneficial to others.
Yeah.
Like even when you, Pastor Paul, referenced Joyce and the struggle that she has as a stay-at-home mom, and I'm sure other people, even with their jobs, ask that question of whether their work is meaningful or meaningless. It's how do people determine the value of their work, right? Value of their jobs? Is it because of the money that you earn or the lack of? If that's the case, make it big as an influencer. Go on YouTube because you can probably make a lot of money. But is that necessarily good work? Is it worthwhile? But yeah, that's the question that I also think about too. When people are questioning the meaningful or the meaninglessness of their work, it's like, well, where's your value? How are you determining the value?
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing to think about, because especially in our culture, in Nova too, the salary is a big factor. And I think for a lot of people, good reasons, it is expensive and all these things to live here. But salary, I think a lot of times determines like the value of your work, and so it's very easy to get paid six figures, doing a lot of IT consulting or software engineering, but in that sense, sometimes the lesser paid jobs are devalued as a result.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate reality. But I do think that we have a tendency to gauge the value of the job by its pay, which I think it's
right. The salary that people receive, that's a reflection of what the world values, right?
Yeah.
And I think not denying the fact that some of the jobs out there, yeah, they do create a lot of value to people, and maybe they should be compensated more. I don't know, but I think for us as Christians, we do have to have a more holistic perspective on work, right? And not simply value work based on what the world values, right? And I think one reflection that has helped me is just the reflection on the parable of the talents, because honestly, some people are going to be less gifted, and they're not going to be able to produce as good a quality of work compared to others, right? But that's okay. I mean, I think as long as the one talent guy, for instance, is able to produce whatever he's capable of producing with his talents, it can still honor the Lord, and I think that's what our calling should be. We're to be content with what the Lord has given to us, and just be faithful in producing what our capacity can produce, and live a life that is humble, right? And so that's I think one lens through which I would assess the value of work. That means regardless of what talent you receive, you can still be lazy too. Like the
Yes.
the 10 talent guy. If he's not producing 10 talent quality, that means he's being lazy and he's being sinful, right? And so you can't just place value on work simply looking at like the quality. It's really, I think you have to look at the whole package, and that's ultimately not our job, I think, in the end. I mean, it's something that we need to teach, encourage as pastors and leaders, but ultimately God knows, right? And so yeah, to offer that as a consideration.
So then, how would you guys advise people who are genuinely wanting to progress in their career, right? Some people might say, well, am I being too ambitious? How do I know, right? If I'm just being too consumed by like titles and whatnot versus I'm genuinely putting in good work that leads to progression. Do you guys have any sort of advice for people like that? Like, it's not bad, right, to pursue promotions necessarily, right? When does it become unhealthy in a sense?
Yeah, promotions are absolutely fine. When the Apostle Paul spoke to servant slaves, if you have an opportunity to be free, right, take that opportunity. There's nothing wrong with excelling. There's nothing wrong with climbing the ladder in corporation. For me, if someone were to ask me that from our church, as a pastor, I would probably ask questions of like, what are the things that you think about, the things that tend to consume your mind? Would certain titles bloat and make your head big? Because as believers, we know that sometimes we might have to take on work that may be considered below our pay grade, may seem a little too humbling, but that's the example that our Lord and Savior set for us when he washed the feet of his disciples, that we too are supposed to follow that example and be willing to wash the feet of other people. And so if I think some of these things just become too big for you, essentially they become your idols, the gods that you worship, then it's a clear problem. So what are you thinking about? What are the things that's constantly consuming you in your thoughts, in your dreams, in your wishes and desires? And are you still able to act as a servant unto others? If people treated you like a servant, will you still serve others? Or will you think, well, I'm a VP or I'm a president of a company, there's no way I would do these things for these people, right? I think then you have a real big problem and understanding of what you're really worshiping at that moment.
This might get me in trouble, but I think given where our generation is, or maybe your generation, since I'm old now,
Yes.
I think most people that it seems to me they have chosen just the easy route, and we don't have that many hard workers, to be honest. I mean, people, they tend to give bare minimum, like I mentioned earlier. Just they work to pay the bills. They're working on the golf course. They're working at home. Less than 4 hours a day, probably. We don't have that many hard workers, and if they had a choice, they will work less, right? I mean, if they can get away with it. And so there is no holy ambition to work for the Lord, right? I think that's just the mindset people seem to have, right? And so it is a bit concerning. I would prefer, especially for our young people who are not married yet, that they would be like working long hours, okay, and having these hopes and dreams to create businesses and to contribute to industries that would really bring value to people, right? Have that ambition. That would be something I think encouraging to see. Okay, and I've been talking about this in different ways before, but just have that entrepreneurial mindset. We need more people like that. Okay, and instead of folks who just settle for bare minimum and seeking just a comfortable life and hoping for a government pension. And so it kind of makes me sick, actually, right? If I think about it. I understand if one gets married, you do want to maybe invest more of your time than before, in your marriage and in your children eventually. But I think yeah, if you're not married, you really have no excuse. I mean, you should be working really hard. And when I say working hard, I also mean serving the church well and faithfully. And I know that our singles, they do make themselves available more. Not all of them, but many of them. So that's a blessing for sure. But I think that's just natural progression of life. And so sorry if this offends anybody, but just as a general rule, I think more of us should be working more, right? Not less. And yeah, I think if I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point given perhaps where we are in our culture. And with that being said, if there are people who are working a lot, which I mean, I know people who do, like whether you're overworking, I think some things to watch out for are things that you tend to start compromising. I think what happens is if you're so career driven and so focused, actually, like your marriage gets neglected, even perhaps children, or even your Sabbath day, right? Like how many like Sundays have you missed because you have to work?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of talking on the other.
That's a good point.
Side, right?
Yeah, I mean, I look at that as fundamentals. So if the fundamentals are being compromised, you have to reevaluate.
Right. Yeah, and so that ambition, which is good in and of itself, I think when it starts to compromise your faith. I think that's when you have to kind of reevaluate what you're pursuing ultimately. And that's one thing, because even when I was working, I think there was a temptation to just constantly move up and make more money, and that led to compromises in whether it's like marriage or I guess I didn't really have a choice for faith in terms of because I had to be at church every Sunday working. But even in my heart, right, I'm just constantly just consumed by work thoughts and had no time for devotion to the Lord. And
okay, I'm sorry. I apologized already for that season. So I'm sorry for making you work too much.
I was just saying that. Just that's my heart too. At some points I asked for it, and so. Yeah. So this to me, this question just came up. So what do you guys think about the idea of wanting to retire early and chill? Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Because that's
gonna bring up more controversy here.
That is a lot of at least that there's a school of people in the culture who there's a whole FIRE movement. I forget what it stands for, but it's like retiring early.
Well, I think it really depends on what your vision for life is, including your vision for retirement. Elder Oud shared this recently. Let's say he retired early, it doesn't mean he's going to stop working, right? It's just going to be a different kind of work. That means he can invest more in ministry, perhaps, right? Or do the things that he was hoping to do with more free time. So I think if for someone, retirement simply means stopping what what you've been doing in your career thus far, but wanting to just refocus your attention on other types of work, right? That are also noble. I think that's fine. Because I do know that some jobs it really sucks the life out of you, right? And it's like the thorns and thistles are plenty in particular jobs, and so like you're grinding it out for like 20, 30 years, and that's all you can really take, like mentally, physically. Like to retire from that, I think is fine, and then you look for other work that you can invest in.
So we can't collect seashells.
Yeah, I was I was thinking about that. John Piper's famous seashell sermon at Passion, I think, '03. And I think that speaks a lot. I think there's a reason why that was such an impactful message.
Can you explain that one real quick? I just threw it out there.
Can you reenact
Yeah.
it?
I don't know about reenactment, but glory. There we go.
But I think that's you're losing the kingdom mindset if all you're thinking about as retirement is doing nothing. I was just reading in I think it was in Numbers. Where God gave the Levites specific time frame of when they can work in the service of the tabernacle, from 25 to 50.
Oh, I read that recently during our family reading time. I was like,
Excellent.
oh wait, 50 years old. That means that maybe I should be done by now.
And so the Lord tells Moses that the Levites, when they turn 50, they can still serve. I think that's what that phrase. There's that line there where they can still serve, but they're no longer serving in the tabernacle and the sacred things anymore, which really I think speaks to like, well, what would they do? Train the younger ones to teach and help them to understand how to be the faithful Levites in dealing with the sacred things, with the holy things. And so if we lose our kingdom mindset, I think we will either work way too much because we think we're betting everything in this world and everything in our current experiences, and we're losing kingdom mindset if we're not working to be faithful witness to the world. I mean, no one's going to listen to someone who's just sitting on the couch watching TV all day or retiring and collecting shells, as John Piper
or playing golf all day, every day.
Yeah, there's no, like no one's going to want to listen to how Jesus is your Lord and Savior whom you worship, and there's nothing greater than him when your life is just this leisure without labor of love and witness unto others. So even in retirement, we're called to have this kingdom mindset. What can I do now that I'm retired from this job or corporation to continue to excel the kingdom of God? And there are those who have chosen to sell everything that they have or even buy a casket and go overseas and be a missionary somewhere and die there. There are those who have chosen to do that. There are people who have chosen to simply, and I'm talking about people in ministry, where they're not going to preach regularly on the pulpit, but they're going to spend a lot more time discipling young men. Right? So they understand that work is not completed in retirement. They're just shifting their focus or intensifying in places where they couldn't before, but now they have more time and opportunity. They're still doing kingdom work in different ways.
Yeah, no, those are really good points. Given what we said about our nature and how to work, working is baked into our DNA. I don't think that it stops after, like you guys are saying, after retirement. And we're not against leisure at all, but we're not meant to live a life of leisure every day.
Too much leisure is a problem.
Yeah, because and I sort of quote or paraphrase Keller again. I think work gives us our inherent dignity as God's people, as God's image bearers, and if we stop that, then we're becoming actually subhuman. That's sort of the point that he makes. And so to continue investing, cultivating, providing service, producing good, that is something that I think we're meant to do in our capacity at that stage until we see the Lord, when our work will no longer be cursed, and we'll continue working without sin and brokenness and the thorns and thistles. And so, I think all of this is just trying to really put into perspective God's blessing of work. Our work is not, like Pastor Paul said, it's not a curse. It has been cursed, yeah, for sure, but it is a good thing in and of itself. And so I think we're really trying to hammer that point in for our listeners. that what you do is not a curse. And so hopefully, this episode is helping our listeners gain better perspective on sort of like healthy vision of work.
Yeah. And as Pastor Paul focused on the concerns of those who are more idle, I think that needs to be taken seriously, because Bible speaks a lot about the consequences of being idle. You don't really hear too much about people overworking in Scripture, because there's an understanding that people are going to be working or else you're going to die. You can't feed your family, you can't provide for your household and society. But the Bible speaks very clearly against those who are idle, of how your hands will cause damage and you're end up going to be starving. You're going to be begging, you're going to be suffering more. Even in the New Testament, or if you're not laboring, then you shouldn't be eating. There's a sense where your work is supposed to produce something good and a great reward that comes from it. But there are stark warnings against those who are idle. As God calls many types of people into His service, even those who are scared and afraid, those who are cowardly, you don't really see God calling people who are idle into the service of the kingdom. And as Christians, that should frighten us. We don't want to be useless. We want to make sure that, we want to understand that God can use everyone, absolutely. But it seems like there comes a lot of conviction and correcting for those who have been idle before God calls them into a specific work.
That's great. Maybe we can say this for the next episode, but I would be interested also just tackling the content that PJ presented in his most recent sermon, because that does touch upon the idea that not all work. I mean, earlier we said, this might be confusing. We said that all work is it's a unique calling, but if we really dissect it, there is some work that is less noble work, right? Some work that is unworthy. So I think we probably have to clarify what that is.
Yeah, we'll definitely tackle that in our next episode. We have a question lined up for that. So I think that brings us to a good point of closure in today's episode. We sort of hashed out why this topic of working as Christians is important, and we also gave some biblical precedents on how God defines work and how He views work. And so in the next episode, we'll tackle some additional questions related to this topic. As we come to the end of this episode of Living Stones, we hope that you found our discussion on work as Christians helpful. If you found value in today's episode, we encourage you to share with others. Remember that you are not alone in this journey. We are members of God's household, united by our shared faith in the Lord and the desire to grow together. So until next time, may God's grace and peace be with you all. Thank you for being a part of Living Stones.